Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today we're coming at you with two brand new reviews for two brand new records. We're going to be talking today about the newest album from electronic outfit, the Go Team, and we're also going to be talking about the newest art pop extravaganza from Young Fathers, Heavy Heavy.
Well, when we do these main review episodes, usually what we review is dictated by what the most interesting things that came out in the week before were. But I always like when I can somehow find a unifying theme between two different records that means the episode has a theme. And if anything, if there's a theme to this episode, it's that these are kind of genreless albums. From genreless bands whose kind of their whole thing is very much bucking the convention of any standard genre or approach to music. And they're also bands that represent, the meeting point of diverse cultures as well within their membership. These are two records that are getting varying degrees of attention, particularly the Young Fathers one, because they've been on the scene for a while, and their Mercury Prize, I don't know if they're just nominated or if they won for their first album, but they've been around for a bit, and we'll get to them. But I want to talk about the album that maybe you might be slightly less likely to have heard about this week, even though they're still a band that have a really passionate fan base and are still making really, really strong records, as we'll say. But the Go Team are an interesting project. They're a band that I've been a fan of for about a year now, introduced to them by our mutual friend of the podcast, Connor, who viewers may remember. We did an episode with him, or I did an episode with him on the Postal Service recently. But Connor's always recommending me bands. Connor's always getting me into stuff that I would not be aware of if it weren't for him, because it's often stuff that doesn't necessarily get algorithmed very heavily on websites like Rate Your Music, or just that their fan bases don't tend to intersect with, the Twitter circles that we run in as well. So I was delighted to be introduced to the Go Team last year by Connor, and with their most well-known and beloved record, their debut album, Thunder Lightning Strike from 2004. And I love that record. I thought it was a really creative, very kaleidoscopic and colorful indie-tronica extravaganza, where you just had all these fusions of influences from across the globe into this very sunshiny, beautiful, eclectic sounding record. And I found it to be really unique and special. But I assumed that this band, based purely on the fact that it had significantly more ratings and seemed to be the album that also, if you look on Spotify as well, that album has significantly more streams than any of the other records. I assumed that this was a one-trick pony band, essentially, and that their subsequent records were not going to be worth checking out. But boy, was I wrong, personally, because when I found out that they were releasing a new album, I was like, you know what, I should give them a listen. I should listen to some more of their records at some point. And I listened to the single that they put out for this album, which is the song Dive Bomb. And that song just completely floored me. And I was like, this is fantastic. And also like such a step forward into obviously more of a full band sound than what I was expecting from the, Avalanches-esque plunderphonics of their debut. So I was like, obviously this is a band that's had a fair bit of evolution. So in the past week, I spent time listening to every single one of their albums. They have quite a few of them. I think they have, I think this is their, I'm going to say 7th album. So I listened to every record that they put out this week. And it was just one of those things where I fell in love as I was making my way through these records. Every single one of them just so charming, so full of life, so completely resistant to any kind of pessimism about the world, while at the same time not feeling hollow or shallow either. I want to throw out a particular shout out to their 2018 album, Semicircle. Incredibly underrated record, where the whole thing is just like, it sounds like a bunch of band kids who are in their school music room making as much noise as possible. And it's got that real sort of, Los Campesinos by way of Sleigh Bells, by way of like all these, effervescent 2000s indie bands that feel like they were completely lost in the wave of more polished and refined.
Sprinkling some Always in there for good measure.
Well, yeah, and their best song, which is on the album Rolling Blackouts, called Buy Nothing Day, is, I swear to God, it is an Always song. Whoever's singing on that one even sounds exactly like Molly Rankin. But yeah, it was a breath of fresh air to discover that this band were still around, still making music that was still really entertaining and really full of spirit, and not at all cashing in on or repeating themselves really in any ways. Because I assumed that music like this, which is so 2000s to me, you know, when you think of 2010s indie, it's all very polished, it's all very tasteful, it's all very refined, it's all very, you know, not full of blemishes, and it's all very different to this. It was 2010s indie, and the sound of 2010s indie is such a reaction to the crazy color and nutso energy of 2000s indie. So, but the Go team have been keeping that energy up consistently, and I really wanted to talk about this new album, especially because it became clear as I was reading reviews, as I was listening to these records as well, that this was a particularly strong album that people were responding really, really positively to. I think that their more recent records, having listened to them now, I think they're pretty underrated, to be honest, but still a lot of people were saying, you know, this is the best Go team album in like a decade or however long, and then people were very ecstatic about this. So I was like, okay, let's put it in the slot, let's go through the discography and let's see where it lands. And I have to say, just off the bat, that I'm obviously, I am going hard in the paint for this band. They're just very me. I feel like anyone who knows me would not be surprised at all that I'm really, really into this band. But it feels like this is a real step forward for them and a real realization of something they've been going for with a lot of their albums, which is kind of incorporating people from various different cultures and you know, various different diasporas into this singular space, essentially, where you get to have moment to moment a different expression of a different musical tradition or a different cultural take on the Go team sound, essentially. And this is backed up very, very strongly by the press release to this album as well, which emphasizes just how diverse this is. So I should mention as well, for the starters, like the Go team were initially formed in the early 2000s as a solo project by the incredibly talented Ian Parton. But as the band became more successful, he started recruiting more people into the band. So he is the front man, and he kind of he creates basically all of the music, but all of the contributors and all the vocalists and all the other people you hear, and a lot of people playing instruments and a lot of people singing and rapping and all that sort of stuff, are people that he invites from as varied groups of backgrounds as possible. And he describes this new album as a global fruit salad, which I love, because basically every single song has a different vocalist on it, a different feature on it. Most of, if not all of these people are not in the Go team. They're just people that Ian has brought along to basically bring their own personality and bring their own verve to the music that he's made, and to also help, you know, decide and drive the creative direction of that music as well. So you have collaborators including the West African girl group Star Feminine Band. You have the Indian Bollywood singer Neha Hatwar. You have the J-pop singer Kokubo Chisato from the indie band Lucy 2. You have the 19-year-old Detroit Bandcamp rapper Indigo Yaj. You have Hilary Bratsett, who you may know if you're a super big Elephant Six nerd, from the band Apples and Stereo. You have Brooklyn rapper Nitty Scott. Basically, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't know these people, but I've come to know these people, and I've come to know how they express themselves through this record. And that's the prevailing aspect of this album that really, really captivates me, is just how disparate and full of different energy it is. From song to song, you have these different performers who are each so idiosyncratic and so full of verve in their own way. And it's an album that never really loses the energy that you get from the get-go with the first two songs, which are two of the loudest and two of the most kind of breaking the door down tracks. The album really maintains that energy in a really nice way, and goes to some interesting places, and reminds me of certain other indie bands that I'll get to as we talk about these songs. But yeah, it's just there. I'm struck listening to the Go team throughout this week, and then particularly focusing in on this album. I'm really struck by how unique this band is. Like, what a sort of refreshing experience it is to listen to them, because you're not really listening to any kind of conventional band in the sense that you'll experience most of the time. You're listening to a collective of people who are kind of dipping in and out and doing, you know, crazy things across these, you know, effervescent and colorful and bright and often kind of cute instrumentals. It's just such a special thing, and I don't necessarily mind that the Go team have done a lot of records that are like this now, because they're so good at it. And here, I think, is along with Semicircle, is the best that this version of the Go team, this kind of post 2010s version of the Go team, where all of the collaborators are just brought in from, you know, disparate places, and get everyone gets to have their moment in the spotlight. I think it's It's so well refined here, and there are also just a lot of really great and well written songs that have really resonated with me and have stuck in my memory as being particularly memorable, particularly special, particularly well performed, and particularly hooky, despite the fact that my brain is full of, like 70 different Go Team songs at the moment. These ones still stand out to me. Jake, I know you've kind of come at this, as is often the case when we review. Sometimes as it's you're kind of at my whim. I'm like, this is going to be worth talking about, and you're like, okay, and
Cool, man.
yeah, sure, whatever. And so I've kind of thrust this onto you, knowing as well, and I did this with some degree of reticence because I don't know whether you're going to like something that I like, because sometimes the things I like are a bit me and a bit much, and sometimes they can kind of clash with some of your aesthetic sensibilities, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes you
I was
see
going to say
the
it's
energy the
it's
same
funny
way as me.
because I think of the two people on the podcast, we probably have the most similar music tastes to one
Yeah.
another.
Yeah, we do, but we both, and you in particular, have these particular like cilantro gene things
Yeah,
where something
yeah.
will just either work for you or it just won't quite get there. So I'm really curious to hear what your experience was, what you were expecting from the Go Team based on how I kind of set this up, and then what your overall sort of thoughts are now that you've had a bit of time to process this.
I won't lie. I mean, I go into everything with an open mind, regardless of whether or not I have an experience with them. But this band definitely had the makings of what I could have seen as being a cilantro gene band, because I was just sort of like, this is just so distinctly not what I typically orbit that I just don't even really know what to anticipate from it. And I did actually listen to Thunder Lightning Strike beforehand because I did want a precedent just going into this, just because this is obviously such an eclectic band. Like, you take a look at this album and the genre tags for it are indie pop, neo psychedelia, alternative dance, psychedelic pop, sunshine pop, hip hop, indie tronica. And it's just like, half of those don't mean anything, and the other half of them are like, what? So naturally, I'm just like, all right, I need to establish a bit of a precedent. They have one album before this. I probably should have listened to the part one to this album's part two, but I figured Thunder Lightning Strike was probably the more quintessential release, and I enjoyed that album a lot, honestly. It had been on my radar ever since you mentioned listening to it at the behest of Connor a while back, and I'd been meaning to get to it anyway. And I listened to it, and I really enjoyed it. Like you said, it was kind of an Avalanches-esque sort of plunderphonics, electronic indie rock thing that felt like it really catered to the things that I gravitate towards to that music, but it also had a lot of things that made it really unique. So now that I had at least some idea of what to expect, I was like, okay, I think I get the bit with this band a little bit. And I think it was nice that this album to me struck a bit of a balance of doing some things that they didn't do on their debut, which again, I can't really chart the course of how they've progressed as a band as well as you can, obviously, because I've only heard their first and most recent. But it seems to me like they have departed slightly from that more Avalanche's core influence. Either that or they just got a lot better at what they did and sort of make it feel a little bit more seamless. Not to say that it's like a huge difference in quality. As a matter of fact, I think this and Thunder Lightning Strike are pretty much as good as each other. In fact, I think I might even narrowly prefer this one. It's not because of any like huge delineation in quality or anything. It's just that the hooks on here stay with me a little bit more. I like the color, the performances, the general energy of this a little bit more. It has moments like, again, the first two songs on here, Look Away, and Dive Bomb are just fucking spectacular. And actually, Getting to Know, the third song as well, I also really love. And the album never really drops off. Honestly, I think it does a great job at sequencing some of its best moments. I really love the hooks on songs like But We Keep on Trying and Sock It To Me. And I think some of the best moments are actually at the end. I think the closer Baby's terrific. And I love the combination of sounds on the song Train Song. Like, this is just like out of fucking nowhere, like slide guitar. I did not anticipate this, and I also never would have anticipated this working. And yet it might even be my favorite song on this album. And I don't know. I really like how focused on it's like it definitely does feel like it departs from, what people typically look for in this kind of music, and how I say this very, very lovingly as someone who has enjoyed these albums, how tasteless it is. These albums are so like we talk about bands like Always as being very sugary pop bands. Like this is tooth rotting shit. Like this is colorful, saturated, give you multiple cavities kind of shit. And I won't lie, that does lead to occasionally moments where they turn up the sugary saturation a little too much for my liking, like on songs like The Me Frequency or Going Nowhere, where I almost just feel like they are. I feel like maybe if I was 10 years younger and maybe not properly medicated, I would really get more out of these songs because they're not like a drop off in quality. Like I don't find anything about their construction to be lesser than anything else here. It's just that they are so with how like loud and big they are, and it just feels like they can kind of have some of their more eclectic ideas that sort of clash together a bit more, like more unfriendly than the other ones do on the record. But overall, I really got a lot out of this. I really enjoyed listening to it, and I really get the impression that I do want to explore more of this band's albums because I feel like they've got a record in them that I will truly like fall in love with. And I get the impression from listening to their first album and their last album that and when it comes to album construction, the art of the record, and marrying that with doing what these guys do, they've got this down to a fucking science, and not to the point where it feels calculated or like mathematical or where it feels like they're just kind of going through the motions. No, they know how to do what they're doing, and they know how to iterate upon themselves and make it feel like you're getting something different out of this new experience. So as a bit more of a go team pleb, I still firmly come down on the positive side of this.
Yeah, I think in bringing the Go team have a shtick, and they do it fairly regularly. They evolve that shtick. Like there's no other Go team record that really sounds like this one. Not
It's a
even
good shtick.
not even the part one, which I think you don't have to hear to appreciate this record. They're very separate albums. And part one to me is like 15 minutes shorter as well. So it's kind of like it's not quite as fully formed as this is. And this again with the addition of a lot of the new contributors on this record, it just feels like so much of a standalone statement that works so well on its own. But yeah, the Go team have their shtick, and they have continued evolving it. I mean, the first three records are kind of a bit more like, the bedroom indie-tronica stuff that doesn't really feel like a full band, that feels a little bit like music that's made very cheaply, but with a lot of passion, a lot of energy. And then with the scene between their fourth album, that's when they kind of started having a bit of a larger than life sound, and then they really honed that with Semicircle, and now we're here with this album that is, yeah, I think I mean I could nitpick it by saying cut a couple of songs and make it really really tight, but I love, again, part of this record's appeal to me is how just completely eclectic it is, the sprawl of it. I mean, you go from one track that's just sugary sweet, deliciously twee vocals. Like I'm very fond of the very sort of like, it's sort of like shoegazy Stereolab-esque sort of, I don't actually know how to describe it, but the song Stay and Ask Me in a Different Way is just, there's such a sweetness to the way that song is sung, and it has this real kind of distorted lo-fi aesthetic that reminds me a little bit of like Stereolab or Broadcast, and I love that. I also just love, and this is something that Go team do regularly fairly well, but have kind of gotten better at, and their collaborators have gotten better at as the albums go on, but the rap features here are just like, they are just so, you listen to the people who rap on this album, you listen to in particular, I want to shout out Indigo Yaj, who's the rapper on Dive Bomb. I think that is, that's the best song in the album, I think. And it's a really compelling song lyrically as well. Like it's a protest song. Essentially, it's a protest song. It's a pro-choice protest song aimed at the American government. And it's, I just get the vocal cadences and the deliveries stuck in my head so easily. Like, Mr. President, Senate, Madam Secretary, introduce himself, but you already know me. Keeping on, organizing, mobilizing, see I'm taking my thing, and then I multiply it. It's just
Bars.
it's so like, there's a real, it's kind of unfashionable as well. Like it's nothing, it's not the kind of rapping, it's not the kind of flows and cadences that you would expect in modern hip hop, because it would be seen as kitsch, or it would be seen as kind of like, regressive. But
it makes me think of Nujabes on a little bit. Like there is kind of a similarity in how they construct songs, but like all of the rap features on Nujabes songs, if you compare them to like, A Tribe Called Quest, there's not exactly the lyrical depth and flow skill, but at the same time, they just kind of work in how colorful and singular they are. And
Well,
like they're not traditionally cool sounding, but they still get the job done in their own way.
well, they're not serious, is the thing, and
No, not at
that's
all.
actually one of the joys of, you mentioned Tribe Quest. I think that's one of the same joys of their early stuff as well. Is it's not actually
Hmm.
like all that complicated or necessarily even innovative from a technical standpoint. It's kind of a bit goofy. It's kind of a bit sort of tongue in cheek. There's a kind of a bit of even irreverent, maybe even immature humor in it, but it's just so effervescently like not pretending to be anything that it
It's
isn't.
nice to not have to take albums seriously sometimes, and I feel like this
Absolutely.
really capitalizes on that. I found it very refreshing because I listened to a lot of very like intense music this week, so getting
Mm.
a bit of a brisk break from that, something that really commits. Because like when you listen to something a little bit lighter on the ears, you might be like, oh, I just want to listen to a record I don't have to think about. But this has the appeal of the pop record you don't have to think about, but
Mhm.
also it's really thoughtful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no, another definite standout to me where this is just so, it's just completely irresistible, is the song Whammy-O with
Whammy-O,
the
yeah.
fantastic feature from Nitty Scott, who's just like, her flows on here are so like, I mean, she has a little bit of like a Nicki Minaj cadence in her
Yeah,
voice early on, but she kind of leans away from that, and she leans into this like really sort of, it reminds me of the 90s a lot. It reminds me of kind of like street rap, and it reminds me of of this time where there was like, where rapping was a thing that was done purely for the joy of it. Not that it isn't anymore, but
yeah.
just that there's so much, we, we listen all I was thinking about all the rap that we listen to, all the rap we review is so dour, is so concerned with
Hmm.
really just gloomy topics and industry bullshit and personal suffering and all that sort of stuff. And this is the thing, right? Is that a song like Dive Bomb is about personal suffering. It's
It
about
is.
resistance. It's about all those sorts of things, but it doesn't feel like a chore. It doesn't feel, it doesn't
Mm-mm.
drain you. And Whammy-O is just like, so it's the absolute apotheosis of that energy. They're just the, I've been like walking around the last couple of days saying to myself, I'm a real rich bitch, $3 6 times, just like randomly out of
Oh,
nowhere. But yeah, and then you get a song like But We Keep On Trying, which I agree is a standout as well. It is, again, one of the more dour songs on the record. In terms of subject matter, it is about, pushing for systemic change that basically allows you to fucking exist in the first place and not getting it, and being, completely just destroyed by the system that you're fighting against, and just standing up again. It's as simple and as straightforward and as universal of a protest song theme as there'll ever be. But the way that this is delivered, you believe in the optimism that this song carries with it.
and the
The
hooks, the very beginning, the yeah, didn't get the votes this time, didn't make the mayor resign. It's so good. It's so
yeah,
good.
yeah, it doesn't, it adds a certain level of like realistic humanness to these sorts of situations, which are often made to be so dark, and songs to emphasize the reality of them. But like, when you're out there with your friends, if you've ever protested in public with other people, it's not this thing where you're all kind of standing there, you're feeling terrible, and it's this thing where you try and find jubilation through the process, because that's what you have to do in
That's,
order to sustain
that's
it.
why the best Kendrick Lamar song is All Right,
Yeah.
motherfucker.
Yeah, and I agree what you said about Train Song as well. I mean, this is, I've listened to every Go Team album. They've never done a song like this before. This is a country song. It's like,
Just makes me love it more.
first time I heard it, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. They're kind of fusing their sort of indie tronica aesthetics with country. But then I was like, the second time I was like, no, this is just a country song. It has a few bits of psychedelic flavoring in parts of it, but it is just a country song with a gorgeous slide guitar part and a great vocal performance as well. I
Hmm.
completely agree. It's a huge standout on the record. And baby, man, this song just
Baby's
completely,
great.
did, did you think of me at all? It's just every time, and the baby, It's like, so it makes me really emotional. And
Mhm.
it ends the record in this like surprisingly sort of like sad but also sort of low stakes place where it's not about huge systemic things anymore. It's just about a single human connection. And I love that. I think vocal performances are great. One of the other things I love about the last two songs is they both kind of end early and have this like little extra musical bit at the end
Yeah.
that Ian's put in there. And in both cases, those additions work because they feel like a the curtain's gone down and then the curtains come up again for the for everyone to take a bow essentially, and you just have this little epilogue to these songs, which I really really love. And because Baby is such a sort of slow, almost dour ending to the record, to have that kind of little kicking sort of reversed loop thing come in at the end, it adds this little final shot of energy that makes it really easy to go back and hit play on Look Away again, which I have embarrassed myself so much trying to sing along to the French rapping and the star frequency like the "Oui, let's ride, leave that home." It's so good.
Uh,
That's like the most Go Team moment on this entire album when you have like this chorus of people singing this refrain in a foreign language. At the risk of sounding ridiculous, there's something kind of utopian about the Go Team as a proposition and the music they make. The happiness and the joy that comes through in their records is so effortless every single time they set out to do it. And they have not ever failed to achieve that joy and that radiant sense of fun. It's a fun album. It's really
oh
fucking
God,
fun.
yeah.
And, I just think it would be cool if music this fun could be taken as seriously as as the Young Fathers is, which is actually a
Well,
fun album too, but there's probably better examples as big hot topic, real shit
Well,
albums
generally
that we talk
speaking,
about
I
all the
think what
time.
you're talking about is like in the music discourse, it's just easier to take, or just generally what people latch onto is the stuff that talks about serious issues, and like, and that's not to say we are not exempt from this. I mean, like Ryley just mentioned talking about hip hop that's super dour. Like, most of the hip hop we've talked about on here and given high scores to is probably really dour, but that's why stuff like this as a counterpoint is so great, and I think it's doubly effective because it's easy to sort of like, I know that this isn't going to be a band for everyone, but at the same time, it's so easy to sell them because there's so many elements of aesthetics of stuff that I feel like, modern indie pitchfork kids would actually gravitate to and love. I mean, hell, Baby sounds like hyperpop always. Like, how do you not think that that is a stunningly awesome proposition? The
Yeah.
only thing I have left to say is that But We Keep on Trying should be paired with like in the next election, the night before, I'll be listening to Futures by Jimmy Eat World, and then after that I'll be listening to But We Keep on Trying the next day.
that's that's the
That is exactly how you and I are going to be spending that 48 hours.
unquestionably. Um yeah,
uh,
it's just awesome. I think just thinking back to other things we've reviewed, maybe the last thing that has this energy is maybe the last Aesop Rock album, which kind of to me has the same sort of irreverence
yeah.
and just the spirit of like loopiness and just sort of like sugar rush energy that I love, and creativity through that. I just think, yeah, so people who like that kind of thing, who are looking for something to really raise their spirits and to make them feel vibrant, then definitely check this out. Uh,
Absolutely.
all right. So, favorite tracks and ratings then for the Go Team's new album. Jake, why don't you go first?
My three favorite tracks, I'll say Train Song, Dive Bomb, and But We Keep on Trying. Least favorite, probably the Me Frequency. That's maybe the song on here I think maybe would be. Again, it's not even like bad or average. I just maybe think the album would be tighter and better without it. But that said, it still doesn't detract too much from the overall experience, so I can't really be mad at it. And I'll give the album a 7 out of 10. It's very fun, and I encourage you, if you've never heard of this band, if you were like me and were just like, what the fuck is a Thunder Lightning Strike before this week, if you've listened to us talk about it, if it at all sounds interesting, please try it out because
Mm.
it is a wonderful way to spend 40 minutes.
Absolutely. My three favorite tracks are Dive Bomb, Baby, and Stay and Ask Me in a Different Way. It's the biggest grower on the album for me, so I want to shout that out. I I don't think I have a least favorite. I mean, even the most sort of slight moment here, which is Going Nowhere, has this really pretty tone to its melody
I
that I
really like
really
that song.
love, and it's kind of endeared me to it more and more. I can't have a least favorite. For me, this is a very strong 7.5. It's very close to an 8. It is absolutely in the higher echelon of Go Team records. I'd probably rank it behind Semicircle, Thunder Lightning Strike, and Rolling Blackouts, but it's basically as good as those ones as well. But yeah, really, really strong album. That gives us an average overall of 7.2 for the Go Teams Get Up Sequences Part 2. All right, let's move on to our second album that we're discussing today. Slightly more high profile release from a band who, unlike the Go Team, have not been around in a while. It's been,
Yeah,
was Cocoa Sugar 2017 or 2018.
something like that.
It's been a while since the last Young Fathers album. And, we talk about how the Go Team's music is this beautiful fusion of cultures from basically across all the continents, almost
Oh.
maybe not Antarctica, but there might be a penguin on there if you listen really closely. But yeah, so Young Fathers are, we're similarly continuing in this theme. Is an eclectic group. It's a trio consisting of frontman K.S. Bankole and his childhood friends Aloysius Massaquoi and Graham Hastings, who formed.
That's Aloysius Massaquoi is the coolest fucking name I've ever seen.
Yeah, you just have him and then Graham Hastings. Just love that. Love that. And they formed Young Fathers in 2008. And if you look at what Young Fathers originally were and what they kind of strived to do, it was very much about the kind of communal experience of listening to music together and having, I suppose, like this collective moment through the power of music, as trite as that can sound when I say it. And what I mean by that is that their live show was a huge part of their identity as they started out. And it wasn't until, a few years after making music that they released their debut album, Dead, and then the even better follow-up, White Men Are Black Men Too, which came in 2015. And then the curious pivot into a more sort of refined minimalist pop with Cocoa Sugar, which is an album that friends of mine absolutely adore. Is an album that's gotten so much praise from a lot of people I respect. And it's an album I've never quite gotten fully. I like it. And I think there are some songs on it like Toy and In My View that are fantastic. But the whole thing has kind of always left me feeling like there's just something a little bit missing here for me. I haven't quite seen the full vision with that album yet. But I will say I've come back to the album twice at different points in time. And I have liked it a little bit more each time. So maybe I will finally someday see the vision with that record. But Young Fathers in general, for me, I have kind of somewhat escaped me in terms of getting the full appeal and the full impact. I think part of it is just that the record as a format is so limited for a lot of the things that they want to do. And you feel this sense of like, these are people who are trying to communicate something very sort of primal and very sort of human, essentially, to the listener. And there's a distance that comes through in their recordings that doesn't quite always let me get there with the music they've put out, especially Dead as well, which is an album that, it got a lot of praise when it came out, and I've never really fully gotten that album either. So I've been waiting, man. I've been waiting years for Young Fathers to click for me. Because there's so much about what they do, especially how difficult they are to pigeonhole. I really don't think Young Fathers have a genre. I mean, you could call them sort of abstract, sort of
From this album
industrial,
alone,
underphonics, sort of hip hop sort of stuff. But each record they make feels like it's pulling from different aesthetics and is doing things that feel completely alien with them, which is maybe why I felt a bit of weird detachment, is that they're doing things that are so alien and often so skeletal that I struggle to put the pieces together. And I do not attribute that to the band at all. I attribute that solely to myself. But the rollout to this album had me very curious, because the first single they released was a song Geronimo, which is maybe still my favorite song on here. It's actually really hard to say. And this song really struck me because this song felt like it had this sense of movement and motion and this sort of growing intensity throughout it, to the point where in its final minute it was almost this ecstatic flurry of voices and electronic instrumentation and howls and all these sorts of things that were happening. And I felt like this primal energy that I felt in previous Young Fathers records, it feels like it's moving here. It feels like it's building to something. It feels like at least with this song, that they were channeling some of the fire of their passion into music that felt like it was moving to a point where it felt as overwhelming as they clearly felt. It felt as passionate as they clearly felt. So there was a passion that immediately struck me that I hadn't quite felt in their previous music. And that was confirmed by the second single, which I think was I Saw, which was like a very similarly structured sort of song, but even more sort of emphasizing that build and that just loudness and intensity of where they wanted these songs to go. And in every single they released after that, Tell Somebody was the third one, I think. And that was another expression of this, another kind of song that felt like it was, trying to put into this limited recorded musical framework an intensity of emotion and feeling that they previously hadn't been able to do, or maybe hadn't quite tried to do in this format. So I was like, okay, this seems like it's going to be the one for me. This feels like they're going to realize something, or they're going to hone in on something that's going to really allow me to finally emotionally connect with them. And boy, was I right?
Reader, they did.
They fucking did. This album floors me. It floored me the first time I heard it. It still floors me. It's still growing on me. I listened to it like half an hour before we recorded this, and it was like, oh God, I liked it even more, in a way that it was like, moments that previously were good, but not quite as intense as those highs. The just little elements of them clicked into place. And I was like, God, that's amazing. Yeah, and I'm kind of a little bit of a mess trying to explore it and explain it. We can get into the songs as well, because it is a very tight, short record, as all their albums are. They're all very short and very refined. But here, that refinement is complemented by this just larger than life intensity buzzing through all of this music. And I find it to be absolutely invigorating. Jake, what are your thoughts overall?
Well, I've had Young Fathers on my radar for a while. I've been meaning to get to albums like Cocoa Sugar or White Men or Black Men too, just because those were albums that got a lot of buzz when they came out. And like Ryley, a lot of people I know like them a whole lot. And I never knew what their bit was. I basically, my sort of like guiding principle with bands like this is that if Rate Your Music gives them a krautrock tag on any of their albums, they may as well not have a genre. And that's more or less true here. Because like I look at this album, and I've never even heard a song by Young Fathers before, and I take a look at this album with this horrifying album cover, and I'm just like, what the fuck is this even gonna be? And then the first thing I'm greeted to is the opening track, Rice, and I get this bizarre, spiritual infused kind of hip hop, neo soul, also kind of rock song. And it's focused on this build, this sublime instrumental progression that just by the time it's over, you're like, God damn. And honestly, the first time I heard it, I didn't know what to think of it, just because it blindsided me so much. I was just kind of like, what the hell was that? And then as the album goes along, this is like, you giving the context for this band makes so much sense, because to me, this does feel like a band that it quintessentially exists in a live setting. And to me, this is like an album that is so overflowing with passion and energy that it feels like the MP3 format can barely even hold all of its power. It's just brimming to the surface with all of this. And I Saw is like this fucking, like, it just builds to this insanely noisy, blocky, blown out thing, and you're just throwing ass when listening to this if you can. Like, my God, the drums all across this album. I'm kind of obsessed with how the rhythmic elements of this record are put into play, because they're simultaneously like the driving force of all of these songs, but they're also so deeply textural. It's like all of these drums are just wrapped in this layer of atmosphere that makes them like it doesn't make it impact you as hard as you might expect it to, but it makes it feel like warmer. It's something that I like. It just feels it's something that I'm not used to hearing in music like this. In order to feel like I get these timbres, I would need to listen to like normally like an old Orbital record or maybe like an early Autechre album to get the kind of percussive sort of definition that these songs have. And then by the time you get to my favorite song on here, one of the best songs of the year in my opinion, which is Drum. I like what the fuck is this song, man? This is joy. This is incandescent joy crystallized into a song. And I can't even possibly attempt to sort of imitate the charisma of the lead vocalist on this, but just the fucking the beat of the drum goes on. Beat of the drum goes on.
The part this song,
so fun.
the part like halfway through where the drums go like double time and you get these like extra drums that are being hit as well, where you're getting that. It's like it's so Liars. It reminds me of Liars. Drums got dead.
Yeah,
Liars,
drums not dead, man.
Have
exactly.
like the pure rhythmic thrust in combination with these just banshee screams that feel like pure expressions of emotion that cannot be expressed any other way. Like here,
it's
what
so
I love,
good.
what I love is that the use of vocals on this record, I mean, the use of the voice as an instrument is taken to the same extreme place as every other instrumental part on this album. Like when the guitars and when the drums and when the synthetic elements all build and become louder and become so intense, so do the vocals. The vocals follow it through that. And one of my favorite moments on the album is the very end of Shoot Me Down as well, where everything gets so intense and you just have this screaming over and over again when the part where he's like, they keep on missing me, and everything is just so intense. And it's like, it's not compressed either, which is almost miraculous how kind of natural and fulsome it still sounds. The way that song kind of starts off as this like weird sort of like based around that kind of bizarre sample at the start of it, and then the bass drums kick in, and then by the end of it you've got this completely swirling intense expression of like obviously aspects of living in, you know, the country essentially of your colonizers, and obviously living in spaces where you aren't necessarily always perceived as welcome, and everything that comes with that is a big aspect of the energy of some of these songs, particularly a track like Shoot Me Down as well. Like at the point where he's just repeating, oh please, oh baby, don't shoot me down. Like it feels like this, it feels like ecstatic and fulsome and just like something that's coming and surfacing out of him, but it also feels like a genuine plea for tolerance as well. It sounds so dumb, but it's a
joyous act of protest. Like this whole album has that kind of energy where it just feels like there's something so culturally ubiquitous about this that I'll admit, of course, is a little bit alien to me, but that alien quality, I feel like that's part of the mystique. That's part of what make this band and this album so singular, is that they just channel that into something that sounds like nothing else right now. And they make this in this album format, which allows, like, I feel like a lesser band wouldn't really know when to quit, you know, like they would probably make the album a little too long, but at 33 minutes, it takes these songs that a lot of them do have that similar kind of energy and that similar structure to them, where they kind of build and then they reach an apex and then they plateau for a little bit. But the way it's structured and the sonic diversity, it really makes everything flow together. You're never like inundated with how a particular part of it sounds, just because it keeps bouncing back and forth and back and forth. It feels eclectic, but it never feels like unorganized. It feels like they're all drawing from the same kind of palette. There's nothing on here that feels like it doesn't fit with everything else, but at the same time, it feels like it's constantly in a state of just trying to excite the listener. Its goal is to just make you move.
Like a lot of the themes that are sort of subtextual on this record are kind of macro social and cultural issues, but they're always explored in really intimate ways lyrically. Like a lot of the lyrics are just about, one person speaking to another person or an intimate relationship of some kind. Like Sink or Swim, for instance, which is just this incredible kind of just relentless pulsing vibration that continues for 3 minutes. I absolutely adore it. And then going into Holy Moly as well, which has some of my favorite lyrics on the whole
Holy
album.
moly is so fucking good.
like like
God.
these the lyrics on this song are fantastic. The damage is done, but there's ringing in my head. A desert storm is approaching from the left. I get no sleeps, no eats, and no rest, covered in violence with love round my neck. Like they're the allusions there to how kind of alienating it can be to exist in a society where essentially even the left, who are claiming to kind of represent you, are kind of speaking for you or are creating this kind of distance there. There's you and I are not qualified enough to really speak on, and
No.
we're not qualified at all really to really speak on the cultural experience that this album is conveying. But the sheer energy here is so utterly intoxicating and completely addictive. And it's this urgency. Like, it's not even just ecstasy. There's moments of sheer raw ecstasy and there's moments of
Oh yeah.
sheer panic, but all of what is unifying them is this complete feeling of urgency. I mean, one of my favorite moments on the album is Ululation, which I think is the most purely
Beautiful.
joyful song on this album, maybe one of the most purely joyful songs I've ever heard. And what I mean by that is not just hyperbole. I mean that every single element of the song is in service of the most intense joy. Like that beautifully bouncy piano loop, the drums, which are just kind of like pushing that piano loop up and up and up and forward, and the actual ululations themselves, the actual vocals that are happening, the just complete noise for the sake of.
So good.
It makes me feel like I am on fire in the best way possible.
The final minute of like, you know what? Actually, fuck it. The final minute of like most of these songs is like best moment in music of the year material. Like each of them have this absolutely exquisite climax that they just ride to its maximum effectiveness, and then as soon as they like can end it at the moment where it would be the most effective, they do, and they go immediately right into the next thing. And this is only something you get from people that are experienced, seasoned musicians. And fuck, Holy Moly, I can't believe I didn't make this comparison earlier. Holy Moly reminds me of Genesis Owusu. A lot of moments on here actually remind me of Genesis Owusu. So if you were a big fan of that album and you're sleeping on this, fucking don't. Please, God, don't.
One comparison that's come up a lot, and I almost kind of hesitate to bring it up because it feels a little bit obvious, but it's certainly there, is like sort of mid-2000s Animal Collective, like Sung Tongs and Feels era. I particularly get that in the climaxes of songs like I Saw, that part at the end where he's just like, brush your teeth, wash your face, run away. That actually, I said before how the climax of Shoot Me Down manages to kind of keep this even level despite everything being so intense. But there are moments that get really compressed and heavy, no pun intended, like the end of I Saw, which is just this, it's so overwhelming. When I listen to this song with headphones, it feels like my head is actually going to collapse inward at the end of the song. And similarly with Tell Somebody, which is just like the falsetto on this song, bro, is just
nuts.
It's ethereal is not even the right, it's underselling it. It is this pure ghostly wail of every emotion at once. And the way that the song just becomes this massive mammoth wall of sound at the end of it, I worry I'm going to start repeating myself, because these songs do have fairly similar structures. They just get there in different ways. And some of them end with having refined down to the one or two core elements, whereas other ones end having increased the number of elements to an extreme amount. I feel like I have to talk about the closing track here as well, Be Your Lady, which is, I think, the most unique piece of music on this album, in the sense that it breaks most strongly from the structural conventions of the other songs on the album, but also how unusual it is makes it one of the most unique and exciting and genuinely transfixing songs on this entire album. I mean, it's just this, it kind of sounds a bit broken. It sounds a bit kind of collapsed already by the time you enter it at the start. And you have this moment in the midsection of the song as opposed to the end. The midsection is where it gets all intense and flurrying drums and full of, loudness. And then it kind of just collapses into this sort of like really kind of like half finished thought of a piano loop that just, and then of course the lyrics as well, which I mean, the song may be transcoded. I don't.
What? For what?
I wonder why it appeals to us. Yeah, it was funny. Like
Gender.
our mutual friend and music critic Hannah Jocelyn said the day this came out that she thought this was the best song of the year. And I understand where she's coming from, because it's, a lot of the intensity.
Perfect way to end the album.
Yeah, a lot of the intensity is pared back, and you just have these very simple expressions. All I have is crazy. All I have is mad. I just want a little competition sometimes. Stick a needle through my eye just to appease you. What might have been is something lovers say, it's all they're gaining. Just these little refrains, these little fragments of lyrics that feel like just random thoughts that you let spill out of you when you're laying next to a lover or something. And just kind of being so, and again, I talked about how intimacy and human connection, like one person speaking to another, is such a big theme on this album. And it really feels like it that's driven home here as well, with this moment that just feels like two people, two lovers laying together in the dark and just sort of being so unaware of themselves and just kind of becoming one organism, we're going to talk about in our Now episode, which will be out in a couple of days' time, we'll talk about love songs. And this feels like a kind of fitting little, thought that reminded me of that conversation, how love can sometimes, and the expressions of love in art can sometimes just be about like you and the object that makes you feel these feelings becoming this one organism. And so unity feels like and coming together feels like a big theme of this album, and it's beautiful the way that is actualized in this really intimate ending. Yeah,
and it's like in the sound too. It's just, this is an album that sounds like unity. It's about the harmonies. It's about the group vocals. It's about everything. Like it's like every song on here starts from a singular place and then moves to a bigger, more like just full place. That, like, honestly, you mentioned the Animal Collective comparison, and I made that irrespective of you talking about it. Like last night I was just talking about how it reminded me of Sung Tongs and Feels, and to the point where on Sink or Swim there like, it's not the exact same thing, but the lead vocalist almost does the exact get that woo, get that thing. And it's like, I heard that and I was just like, holy shit. And it's that same like kind of just purely liberated freak folk expressionism that I fucking adore the energy of. This is just, I don't know, it's really nice to see albums so singular this on. Like, I feel like, we've been doing the podcast for more than 3 years now, and at this point you just sort of feel like sometimes like nothing surprises me anymore. But then you get an album like this and it's just like, man, the possibilities are fucking endless. Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. Like, and the first time I heard it, I was like, it was like this, it felt like this snapshot, this 30-minute snapshot of this energy that had started before you got there and would continue after you were gone. And it still feels that way as well. But I also, the more time I spent with it, I have come to appreciate the actual craft of how well constructed this is as an album. It's hard when you're a bit as an album, obviously this album has many bits, but when one of your principal bits is, rising to this intensity and lingering in that moment, you very much risk that becoming stale when you do it over and over and over again, because it's a very predictable progression. But there's always, I never feel as though I've reached the highest height that this album wants to take me within any particular song. I mean, some songs like Tell Somebody and I Saw and Shoot Me Down and Ovulation take me to those heights by the time that I'm there, but it always feels like just another and a different exploration of that constant movement forward and upward, right? And that's the thing about this
Mm-hmm.
album. I think that's why these songs are structured the way they are. If I can do my little meta and the analytical thing that I like to do, is that the whole album is kind of like about going upward, about moving upward, whether that is the idea of like a Sisyphean task of like rolling the boulder up the hill, the constant progress towards trying to achieve, whatever your end goal is, unity, acceptance, equity, all those sorts of things, or just the thrill that comes with the rising, the moving upward, the climbing the mountain, the ascending above everything below you, being able to be above it all and not be affected by everything that was down on the ground holding you there. And that's what I think the album is all about. It's about that constant ascent and the joy and the freedom that comes through feeling that height as you get there, as you go higher and higher and higher, and how that feeling never gets old.
I think it's about simultaneously how it's both of those things. It's both about the adulation, the excitement, the energy, and the anxiety, and all of that. Like, it's all channeled and all felt, and none of it's diluted. And I think that's the most impressive thing, is that this is so artfully made that you when you make something like this, you run the risk of just having it slapdash, like its construction just being so all over the place and just being this raw thing. And in order to make it feel like a concise statement, you have to ride this impossibly difficult line. And somehow, I really do think they've done it.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely agree. It's a remarkable album. It's too, I'm not even sure if it's my album of the year. I basically think that I like this basically as much as the Paranormal album. They both give me similar feelings in very, very different ways, of these intense heights that they can take me to, where I feel like I'm above everything that I was experiencing before I hit play. And that's awesome. Okay, well, let's do our favorite tracks and ratings then for Young Father's Heavy Heavy. I'll kick us off. My three favorite songs on this album are Geronimo, Ululation, and Shoot Me Down. My least favorite, I don't have one. I mean, no, I don't
Nah.
have one. It's just it's that consistent height for me, and I didn't think I was going to do this, but my last listen cemented it for me. This is getting a 9 out of 10 from me. Incredible
Fuck
album.
yeah. Here's the thing, is that I I I think I'm largely in the same place with it, honestly. I just need more time with it. That's and thankfully it's designed in such a way that it feels like the perfect album to live with, just because it's like, oh, I need 30 minutes of joy. Perfect. I'll just put this on. So my three favorite tracks are Drum, maybe my song of the year. Probably, I don't know. Drum, Holy Moly, and probably Tell Somebody. Least favorite, at the moment, I'd say the only thing that I don't love as much of the rest of the record is Tell Somebody. I do think that's a very good song, but, you know, ask me in like a month. I don't know. I'll give this a tentative 8.5. It's nipping on the heels of a 9, but goddamn, numbers don't matter. This album's too fun. Who gives a shit? It's great.
Beautiful, which gives us overall an average of 8.7 for Young Fathers Heavy Heavy. Let us know at home what you think of either of the albums we have discussed today, the Go Teams Get Up Sequences Part 2 and Young Fathers Heavy Heavy. Did they bring you as much joy and intense emotion as they did for us? Do you have different feelings? Do
Are
they
you dead
differ from
inside?
us? Or do you agree completely with our thoughts on this album as well? If you have additional perspectives as well, if you're someone who's a little bit different from us and maybe has something to bring to the conversation that we can't, we definitely want to hear from you in the comments below. We love hearing those different perspectives. So yeah, hit us up and let us know your thoughts on these albums. We'll be back in 2 days' time with an episode where we talk about the latest music news and we talk about our favorite love songs for Valentine's Day as well. So stick around for that and much more in the Jams and Tea pipeline. If you want to go above and beyond and support us directly, you can hit the join button for just $1 a month. Become a member of the Jams and Tea family. Get your name credited in the title crawl of every video on this channel. Plus, if you want to recommend us some music to listen to, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile. As always, though, folks, until next time, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Skittles, taste the rainbow.